Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Nita Asher. Last week, Treasury issued long-awaited proposed regulations on the excise tax. The proposed regulations are large in size and they are significant. Joining me to share their insights on the guidance are Matt Lamorena and Veena Murthy. Matt, Veena, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nita.
So before we dive into the guidance, I've been getting quite a few calls from various companies, and I feel like the initial response is somewhat of a mixed bag, where there are definite steps in the right direction with respect to the proposed regs, but also some questions and concerns that remain unaddressed with respect to the excise tax on stock buyback. Matt, can you set the stage a bit more and briefly talk about the excise tax and what guidance has been issued before the proposed regulations?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's hard to believe, but we've been talking about this excise tax for coming on 2 years now, right? So the tax was enacted in August of 2022, and a notice came out in December of 2022, right? And that notice provided general guidelines, right, on how the excise tax should be applied, and things like, what is a repurchase? What is a stock repurchase? What is an issuance of stock? When are they deemed to occur? And what's the value of those shares that are being repurchased or issued? And, we've had that a whole year and a little bit more to extrapolate and to think about all sorts of different fact patterns and how those rules apply. And so, the proposed regs are a welcome update.
And Matt, sticking with you, could you talk about the significance of these proposed regulations and the guidance they provide?
Sure. I mean, we've been thinking about all these different fact patterns that this excise tax can apply to. In that process, what we've been looking maybe to the proposed regs to do is to simplify or perhaps streamline the application of the tax to some of those fact patterns. I think, there are definitely some helpful areas where there's been clarity provided in the proposed regs, but I think by and large, the theme is we have general principles in the statute and in the notice, and we'll follow those, right? And what that means is, as practitioners, as taxpayers, there are a lot of things we need to think about. So if you're undertaking a transaction, you need to think about how that transaction is characterized from a corporate tax perspective, from a compensation and benefits perspective, from a lot of different perspectives before you layer on the excise tax. And that's a lot of work that can involve a lot of analysis in different areas, can involve a lot of specialists, and a lot of information from a lot of different sources, at publicly traded companies.
Thank you, Matt. Veena, turning to you, are there any surprises in the regulations or areas where guidance is needed but not provided? Are you recommending that taxpayers submit comments on the regulations?
So yeah, I think there were a few surprises, and then there were also not surprises. Among the surprises, I think, are that the deadline was delayed until the final regulations are issued. Another surprise, I think, is that people were hoping that the very broad funding rule that applies to foreign corporations with U.S. subsidiaries that may be deemed to have repurchases would be narrowed more than it was. The statute didn't really affect that issue much, and the notice created a very broad funding rule. And we were hoping in these proposed regs that, for example, ordinary course transactions would be an exception and allow for some narrowing in application, but that wasn't the case. There are certain areas related to guidance. One very broad addition to a statutory exception for employer-sponsored retirement plans relates to foreign-funded plans, and Treasury's actually asked for comments on that. With respect to the question about comments are a very valuable part of the process. It's pretty clear that Treasury and IRS considered a lot of comments, and in the preamble to these proposed regs, they go through a lot of them and describe whether they agreed and disagreed. So I do think that's a valuable part of the process. And if people do have issues they want to bring, they definitely should consider comments.
Great, thank you. As you noted, the proposed regulations delayed the tax filing and payment of the excise tax until the first full calendar quarter after the final regulations are published. What actions could taxpayers consider taking to be proactive?
As Matt noted, the proposed regulations still point taxpayers to substantive law in the relevant areas. So whether it's an M&A transaction, whether it's the funding rule with respect to foreign corporations, whether it's compensation and benefit tax issues in terms of issuances and the netting rule or the statutory reductions, taxpayers still need to look at all of the data and the information that they have and apply the facts and circumstances of the regulations, of the law, of the guidance against that. And one thing we're seeing a lot is that the data sets and the information out there aren't necessarily aligned with these rules. So there's quite a lot that can be done and quite a lot that already has been done. So being proactive now and getting ready when the taxpayer does need to file and pay the excise tax is, I think, a very important thing to do right now because it does involve quite a bit of analysis.
Matt and Veena, thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks. Great to be here as well.
Like you, we're also continuing to process this robust guidance package, and we'll have more in upcoming episodes. In the meantime, we appreciate you spending this time with us. Take care.